Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. So let me just give you the quick rundown of what we're tackling today, because it is massive. We are looking at the absolute core tension between science and religion. We're talking about the huge debates around God, the rise of atheism, and how scientific discovery is basically just shrinking the space for the divine. It's this ultimate clash, right? Verifiable evidence on one side and the demand for absolute faith on the other. And our mission today is to figure out, can these two completely different worlds actually coexist, or are they just locked on a collision course?
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the source material we have today, it's pretty clear that this collision is, well, it's only speeding up. It's arguably the defining intellectual conflict we have right now.
It really is. And we've got a stack of research here detailing exactly where the machinery of science grinds against religious claims. And before we really get into dismantling all of this, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Because for you listening today, we are cutting straight through the noise. We're skipping the polite talking points to see why seeking the truth in science always seems to threaten the divine.
Right, and a great place to start is actually with one of those polite talking points, you know, the one society uses to kind of avoid the discomfort of this whole debate. The sources spend a lot of time deconstructing this idea of non-overlapping magisteria.
Oh, right. The whole science explains the how and religion explains the why thing. I mean, people love that concept.
They do. It's very comforting.
It's like having two roommates who, split the chores perfectly. Science takes out the trash and fixes the plumbing, basically the physical stuff. And religion gets the realm of meaning and morality. And they never step on each other's toes.
Yeah, in theory, that sounds incredibly civilized. But historically speaking, that non-aggression pact has just never existed. The research makes it painfully clear that this clean division is a total myth.
Really? So religion doesn't just stay in the why lane.
Not at all. History shows religion aggressively claiming the how territory all the time. Theological institutions have, well, they've rarely been okay with just sticking to metaphor and moral philosophy.
Right. I mean, Galileo is the classic example here, isn't he?
Exactly. And the sanitized version of the Galileo story is just, oh, it was a minor disagreement about orbital mechanics. But the actual friction was so much deeper.
Because he wasn't just doing astronomy.
Right. He wasn't just pointing out how the solar system worked. The church had built this entire cosmological worldview where Earth and humanity were at the absolute center of creation. So by proving the Earth moved around the sun, he was
demoting humanity, like literally moving us out of the center of the universe.
Exactly, and that perfectly illustrates the core problem here. Even when science tries to stay in its lane, just answering the mechanical how, those answers inevitably trespass onto territory religion has already claimed as absolute truth. I mean, you see the exact same thing today with the rejection of evolution.
Oh, totally. Biological evolution is like the ultimate trespass.
Yeah.
Because religion says humanity is the product of intentional divine creation. Like a creator specifically designed you.
Yeah. And then evolutionary biology walks into the room and says, actually, here's the exact opposite mechanism.
Right, natural selection.
Yeah.
Millions of years of blind, unguided mutation.
Yes, exactly. There's no predetermined goal. It's just environmental pressures filtering out variations. You simply cannot merge those two explanations without breaking one of them.
Yeah.
An unguided random process can't simultaneously be a meticulously planned design.
It's a logical contradiction. And the source material highlights that these structural collisions go even further than biology. I mean, we're talking about the age of the physical universe itself.
Right. This isn't just a philosophical debate. It's a conflict of hard, verifiable numbers. Young Earth creationism is the perfect example here.
Where they claim the Earth is, what, like 6,000 to 10,000 years old?
Yeah, based on literal readings of ancient texts and genealogical timelines. But then you look at how science measures time.
Which is totally different, like radiometric dating.
Exactly. Scientists aren't just guessing the age of rocks. They're measuring the decay of radioactive isotopes, like potassium argon. And that decay rate is a fundamental constant of physics. It does not change.
So when geology uses that physical clock, and astronomy looks at the speed of light and the expansion of the universe to get a completely different reality.
A massively different reality. The Earth is roughly 4.5 billion years old, and the universe is 13.8 billion years old.
That is a wildly different number than 10,000.
I mean, we're talking about a margin of error equivalent to a billion-fold difference. And you have completely independent scientific fields using entirely different instruments, unanimously corroborating this deep timeline. The theological timeline just kind of shatters against the physical evidence.
Which, usually brings up a major defensive move from the religious side. And I know you listening have probably thought about this. What about miracles?
Ah, right. The ultimate divine trump card.
Exactly. People ask, well, couldn't the creator just fast forward the aging process or suspend physics to part a C? Miracles are used to explain away all these massive discrepancies.
The sources actually address miracles directly, and they explain why inserting a miracle into a scientific framework fundamentally destroys the entire enterprise of science.
Wait, how so?
Well, think about the epistemic definition of a miracle. It requires the universal laws of nature to be temporarily suspended by an outside supernatural force.
So it introduces this invisible, omnipotent variable into every single equation.
Precisely. And the scientific method relies entirely on the universe having consistent laws. If you drop an apple today, gravity pulls it down. If you drop it tomorrow, the same thing happens.
Right.
But if a supernatural entity can just intervene and decide that tomorrow the apple is going to float or that a disease will vanish without a physical mechanism, then the laws of nature aren't laws at all. They're just temporary suggestions.
Oh, wow. And if the laws were just suggestions, then the tools we use to measure reality are completely untrustworthy.
Exactly. You could never truly isolate a variable in a lab. How do you know your chemical reaction worked because of your catalyst and not because an invisible deity just nudged the molecules?
You wouldn't. Science simply cannot function in a universe where the rules are subject to divine whim.
Which leads to this fascinating psychological paradox that the text explores. Because despite this total incompatibility, there are brilliant, highly successful scientists who are deeply religious.
Right. I mean, Georges Lemaitre is the classic example. He proposed the expanding universe, what became the Big Bang Theory, and he was also an ordained Catholic priest. People bring him up all the time to say, look, science and religion get along fine.
It's a great point, but the text introduces a crucial nuance here. Methodological naturalism.
Methodological naturalism?
Yeah, it's the operational rule of modern science. It means that when you're trying to explain the physical world, you have to restrict yourself strictly to natural causes.
So it's an epistemic rule, not necessarily a personal belief. It's like troubleshooting a broken computer. If it won't turn on, you assume a dead battery or a hardware failure. You start checking physical components.
Right.
If you begin by assuming a magic spell broke the motherboard, you literally can't fix the problem. You have to assume a physical cause to do the job.
That is an excellent analogy. When a religious scientist walks into their lab, they practice methodological naturalism. They leave their supernatural explanations at the door.
Right. They don't write demonic interference in their peer-reviewed paper if an experiment fails.
Exactly. They look for a miscalculated physical variable. For the duration of their work, they completely adopt a naturalistic framework.
So they essentially compartmentalize. They split their cognitive approach to reality.
Yes. They achieve this psychological harmony inside their own minds. But the text draws a really sharp distinction here. Individual psychological harmony inside one person's brain is not the same thing as institutional harmony between the two fields.
Right. Just because a person can hold both ideas in their head doesn't mean the underlying methodologies aren't violently opposed.
Exactly.
So if a scientist leaves God at the laboratory door, where does society put God? This actually transitions perfectly into one of the most dangerous theological concepts in our research, the God of the gaps trap.
Oh, yes, the God of the gaps. It is a massive epistemological vulnerability.
Let me set this up for the listener. Humans inherently try to reconcile these forces, so we end up squeezing God into the shrinking shadows that science hasn't lit up yet. We treat God like a temporary placeholder variable in an unsolved math equation. Like, we don't know the answer yet, therefore, God did it.
And historically, that was the default human condition. Ancient civilizations didn't understand atmospheric pressure, so lightning was literally Zeus. They didn't understand microbiology, so plagues were the wrath of God. The divine was the placeholder for human ignorance.
But the danger there is that science is just this unyielding, progressive engine. It doesn't stop.
No, it doesn't. Over the centuries, science has relentlessly filled in those gaps. We mapped the atmosphere, we discovered germ theory. The domains that used to belong exclusively to the supernatural were systematically conquered by naturalistic science.
So the perimeter of the divine just keeps shrinking. Every time a new peer-reviewed paper comes out, God gets evicted from another corner of the universe.
And according to the sources, this dynamic is largely responsible for the modern intellectual rise of atheism. Now, the text is careful to say that closing these gaps doesn't definitively prove that no gods exist.
Right, because you can't technically falsify an invisible, intangible entity.
Exactly. But it exposes how fragile the religious argument is. If your whole belief system is built on things we don't know yet, your faith is perpetually on the defensive. It's a doomed theology.
Because the more humanity learns, the less room there is for your deity.
Right. And atheism gains traction because it doesn't rely on those gaps. It just aligns itself with the expanding frontier of science, waiting for the natural explanations to arrive.
Let's pull the lens back for a second and look at that scientific method, because understanding why it keeps winning this territory war is so essential. The sources outline 4 core pillars of science: testability, falsifiability, repeatability, and peer review.
And falsifiability is arguably the most ruthless filter there is.
Right, the whole Karl Popper black swan problem. If you claim all swans are white, you don't just go looking for more white swans. You have to actively search for a black swan. And if you find one, your theory is dead.
But religion fundamentally insulates itself from that. It protects its claims by making them invisible or spiritual immune to the black swan test. Science demands vulnerability.
And peer review. That's the ultimate defense against human bias. A scientist's findings aren't accepted because they're charismatic or holy. They're accepted because rival scientists who actively want to prove them wrong do the exact same experiment and get the exact same result.
And that method universally works. It works in medicine, aerospace engineering, everything. It's the most powerful truth-finding engine we have. But the sources point out something really chilling when you turn that tool toward the supernatural.
What does it find?
A meaningful silence. Over 400 years of applying this objective engine, science has never, not once, found verifiable, repeatable evidence supporting a supernatural claim.
A meaningful silence. Wow, that is heavy. So it's not a loud declaration that God is dead. It's just total radio static when we tune our instruments to the divine frequency.
Right. It's not absolute proof of absence, but centuries of that specific silence build into a monumental mountain of circumstantial evidence for a purely naturalistic universe.
Which brings up a deeply human question for me. If the intellectual friction is this severe-like, the timelines contradict, the methods are mutually exclusive, why do you and I and society try so hard to force a reconciliation? Why do we want them to get along so badly?
Well, the text suggests the answer lies in their utility. Science and religion serve entirely different but equally powerful human needs.
Okay, so science gives us the functional truth. It cures diseases, builds smartphones.
Yes, but it is profoundly ill-equipped to provide meaning. A perfectly calibrated electron microscope cannot tell you how to grieve the loss of a parent. It can't tell you what makes a moral life.
Right, but religion can.
Exactly. Religion is this incredibly powerful engine for social cohesion. It gives us community, moral frameworks, rituals for grief, and a deep sense of identity. Humans are meaning-seeking primates. The emotional utility of religion has massive survival value.
So we basically want the best of both worlds. We want the antibiotic to cure the infection, but we also want the absolute assurance that our consciousness survives death.
We do. But the crux of this whole deep dive is that an emotional need for harmony doesn't magically create intellectual compatibility. Wishing two things aligned doesn't change their fundamental mechanics.
Which brings us to the ultimate uncomfortable paradox in all this research. And this is the concept that really forces you to reevaluate how you process information. We are dealing with 2 completely irreconcilable standards for truth.
The conflict of epistemology.
Exactly. In science, demanding evidence is the highest virtue. If you make a claim without testable proof, you are exiled from the community. But in religion, the highest virtue is the exact opposite.
Right, religion demands faith.
And faith, by definition, is being willing to believe a monumental claim, precisely without requiring evidence.
The contrast is jarring. In one institution, skepticism gets you a Nobel Prize. In the other, skepticism is a moral failing, and blind belief gets you spiritual salvation.
It's intellectual whiplash. How can anyone operate 2 diametrically opposed algorithms for reality at the same time?
It requires an incredibly difficult internal audit. And, if we connect this paradox back to the God of the gaps concept, the sources leave us looking at the horizon of human knowledge, the frontier where the next major collision is happening right now.
The final gap.
The human brain. Neuroscience is currently doing to the mind what astronomy did to the stars. We are mapping the neural architecture of consciousness closer and closer every day.
We're literally figuring out the chemistry of thought itself.
Right. So consider the implications. What happens when the very human feeling of faith, that desire for community, that sense of spiritual awe during a prayer, what happens when all of that is mapped out as nothing more than chemical evolutionary survival mechanisms?
Like when a neuroscientist can point to a brain scan and say, right there, that electrical cascade in your temporal lobe, that's why your species evolved to feel the presence of a creator.
Exactly. If the final gap that science fills is the human soul itself, does that finally bridge the gap between science and religion? Or does science just consume religion entirely?
Wow. If we uncover the exact biological algorithm that makes us need God, is it still God? Or is it just another piece of the physical machinery we finally learned how to measure? That is a massive concept to mull over today. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep seeking the evidence, and we'll catch you on the next one.